welcome everybody. We're here today to really kind of have a dialogue asking one big question, which is how to support the small businesses in advancing decent work and living income and wages in the food sector. And before we get into the detail of that, I'm just going to go through some call etiquette. So, please do use the comment box to add your voice into the process, because yes, it's a nice way to have everybody give their input and ask questions. Keep your mute on unless you're talking, obviously. It's also lovely if you have your video on, because it's nice to see who's in the room. It makes us feel like we're actually all together. So if you feel able to do that, that's super. We are recording this call and we will post it online afterwards so that other people can watch it. So just be aware of that. And related to that, just don't share any commercially sensitive information. This is not the place for that. Need to say thank you to our sponsors, EIT Food, who through their EU funding are funding this series of dialogues. So the dialogue series came out of the UN Food Systems Summit. We did a lot of the work to engage small businesses all around the world and the importance of them. At the same time, there were these coalitions of action on key issues that are going to go ahead and for the next decade advance some of the main issues in relating to our food systems. And so we really just wanted to make sure that those people working on the coalitions kind of really heard the voice and the potential from working with small businesses, which are, after all, about half of our food economies that they manage. So it's impossible to imagine changing things without working with small businesses in some way. So this dialogue series was to bring together our small business community in the Good Food Hub with the dialogues, with the coalitions. And so this one is working with the coalition on decent work, living income and wages. It possibly has the longest title of all the coalitions. And I'm actually just going to initially hand over for a little briefing just to sort of set the stage on why is this coalition important, and really why is this issue of decent work, living incomes and wages such a compelling area for action. And I'm actually going to hand over to Peter Hurst, who is part of the coalition, has spent his life working on these issues for the likes of the International Labour Organization, and was part of the action track at the summit that worked on advancing equitable livelihoods, which was very much the place that this coalition was born out of. So Peter, let me hand over to you just for a couple of minutes to set the stage on this issue.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, okay. Whoops, is there going to be a... Yeah.
No, I think that's for later, isn't it?
Well, it doesn't matter. Later. Okay, well, the reason why we're all here is basically, if we're talking about food systems, then we're talking the people who work in them and then we're talking, a lot of the people we're talking about are the world's core poor, whether they're farmers, smallholder farmers, or whether they're wage workers. Because one of the great paradoxes in life, and one of the great injustices, is that while most of us are well fed in many countries, a lot of the people who produce our food, distribute our food, serve it in restaurants and cafes, are poorly paid, often work in exploitative conditions. In other words, they don't have decent work. And that's what we've been trying to put right. Now, what I did in, one of the slides was actually put the food system workers who we need to think about. I don't know if you have that. I should explain, I was asked to do this just very quickly on behalf of Elvis from the ILO. Elvis is Ukrainian, and for understandable reasons, he's very overwhelmed at the minute. But when we're talking about food system workers, what we were saying that through the summit was that we needed to talk about farmers. That's everything from smallholder farmers, what are often called family farmers, through to sharecroppers and the like. And remember, there's a lot of women farmers. They're a majority in this sector. We then need to think about pastoralists, an estimated 200 to 300 million. Then we need to come on to waged agricultural workers, and that includes workers in aquaculture. No one quite knows how many there are, an estimated 300 to 450 million. Forestry workers, self-employed, waged. Fishers, land-based, freshwater fishing, capture fishing, a lot of migrant labor, as with the waged agricultural workers, a lot of forced labor in this sector. Manufacturing, the food process, coming on to the food processing, manufacturing sectors, many workers involved in that section. The whole transport distribution sector, very important, including food delivery drivers, retail workers, food preparers in restaurants, cafes, restaurant cafes and canteens. And there was just a note to say, this is a sector where child labour is found. So just very quickly on the decent work issues. If we're looking at the decent work issues, we have 4 pillars. I don't know whether they were put on the slides, but pillar 1 is employment. That the whole idea of decent work is to promote labour rights and regulations. So the idea that we have to make sure that workers and farmers are protected by law. In the pre-summit, the ILO Director General gave a presentation in which he said many countries, many governments consciously and deliberately continue to exclude agricultural workers from protection under basic labour laws. The ILO Director General. So we have a situation where many workers in the world in food systems are simply not covered by law or poorly covered. So that's one area we have to need to think about. The second area is employment. And obviously, one of the main employers in this sector are small businesses. And we need to make sure that small businesses flourish, can provide decent work, can provide decent wages, decent working conditions. We need to think that through. The third area is social protection. That's the third pillar of decent work. And social protection covers everything from things like basic health insurance, basic unemployment benefit, pension things, and it includes health and safety. And we should remember when we're dealing with agriculture, we're dealing with one of the 3 most dangerous sectors in terms of deaths, in terms of injuries, and in terms of work-related diseases. And the fourth pillar is social dialogue. And this is social dialogue where farmers and wage workers need to be at the table when policies on agriculture and food are decided. They're often excluded, and especially smallholder farmers, and equally that would apply to small businesses in this sector. They need to be in the dialogues. So with those opening words, I'll pass you now back to Molly and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, I think so. Molly, am I right in saying I think we should? Some of this is setting us up for later on, and I should jump into talking to the SMEs. Is that right, Molly?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll take the slides
Super.
down now.
All right, great. So thank you. I mean, it's really clear that this whole decent work, living incomes and wages is super important as part of strengthening our food systems. So many poor people or exploited people in the sector. It's also really clear that the small businesses, many, we've got loads of them in the Good Food Hub and lots of them in the that came through in the competition that we ran. They are amazing in terms of actually working directly with lots of stakeholders in the food system at all points in the value chain, and really offer quite a powerful vehicle for advancing this agenda. They link farmers to markets. They're the part of the economy that really creates a lot of jobs, often improving incomes all up and down the value chain. And some of you are here today, and as pioneers, I think I can see you scaling solutions. We're going to hear about some of your work, often in the toughest of markets. Your struggles, actually, I think also are really fascinating. Your felt experience of what it takes to do this work is really good information for the folks that are operating at a kind of international level to say, actually, these are the chain of changes that we need if we're going to move the needle on this issue. So, what are the kind of policy, financial, cultural reforms that are needed to unlock any country's pathway to a more inclusive and equitable food system? So, that sets us up for the conversation between listening to the SMEs doing this work on the ground, and then stepping back and hearing the coalition's plans, and then going, actually, how do we bring that together? Those are really the three parts of this session today. So we're going to kick off actually with listening to some of the small businesses to hear directly from them about the impact they're having and the kind of constraints they face in having an even better impact on this agenda. So we're going to go into 3 breakout groups, and so in each breakout group we're going to have one pioneering small business. We've got in group 1 we've got Lastiana, who's the CEO of Etiquette Green in Indonesia. You're doing amazing work. I think there's a lot of coconut things going on with you, Lastiana, but really I'm watching all your videos, doing an amazing job of working with women and rural communities to really elevate, you know, the quality of work that they're doing and the incomes they're receiving. Second week we've got Alejandro from Indigro in Colombia, who is who's got a brand of coffee where he's working with lots of women producers to kind of do a special brand of their coffee that helps them increase their incomes. And then lastly, in group 3, we've got Jimenez from Afex Commodities in Nigeria. They've got an amazing platform that are working with lots of smallholders and kind of integrating them into markets. So yeah, we're going to go in. It's a chance to listen to them and kind of actually get inspired by their stories. So Alice, you want to send us to our groups? Everybody, Alice has dragged us all the way back together. So yeah, really curious to hear just a few highlights from each group, both on what was inspiring about the story of the business presenting, but also what we learned about the kind of support or ideas or challenges that might actually help them make a greater impact. And I know we asked for volunteer rapporteurs from each group, and it'd be lovely to kind of hear those now. So group 1 that was with Lastiana, did you have somebody put their hand up to share back some reflections?
So we didn't decide on a rapporteur, so I'm happy to do that unless anyone else from the group would like to jump in. I'll give you a second in case anyone does want to jump in. But if not, I'll go ahead. I mean, I think we heard, everyone who spoke was super inspiring, and Lastiana, it was really great to hear from you. So Lastiana runs a coconut exporter from Indonesia, and all their products are organic and fair trade. And we also had some other great people on the call. So a small shop in rural UK and an organisation in Zimbabwe, mainstreaming indigenous species in agriculture. All shared really interesting and exciting kind of projects. And it was really, really inspiring to hear kind of the huge impact that they have within their kind of spheres of influence wherever they are in the world. So that was really, really exciting. Just to share a few things from Lastiana and a few of the others around what could boost the impact of SMEs. We talked a lot around the cultural constraints, particularly in the Indonesian context, around women or younger people sort of trying to educate people that, other people that are not being taken seriously. And that was one of the issues that Lastiana was facing. Other things we talked around capacity and access to technology. Finance, so small companies being charged higher interest rates than larger business, so it's kind of more difficult to kind of advance in these areas. And then another thing we talked around was around improving competitiveness for small businesses, because as much as small businesses want to incorporate these issues, it's often a lot harder because they don't have the same resources as bigger companies. So thinking through how the coalition could kind of maybe support with that, and also in providing the information around these issues, like what Peter presented, in a really accessible way that can kind of be taken off the shelf and then be reused by small businesses to kind of save the work that then goes into kind of finding the different bits of information. I'll leave it there, but anyone from the group, please jump in, because I'm sure there's many great things that I've missed. But just to say, I really enjoyed that discussion. It was really, really interesting.
Thank you. Is there any one person got any add on that? I'm also going to keep us rolling through to other groups for the sake of time, but Is there anybody that's got a burning thing they want to share in addition? Okay. Second group was with Alejandro of Indigo, with Nana facilitating. Do we have a report out from there?
I don't think we did, but then Alejandro, somehow we volunteered him to speak, but I can start and then Alejandro, you can come in, or any member of the group. But we also had quite a very interesting discussion where Alejandro shared some insight into his businesses and some of the constraints that they have experienced. And it was very interesting to also find out that, I mean, a small business started with just one conversation, and now it's going into something where he's supporting a lot of women also to, have access to decent employment, which is also one of the key focus areas that the coalition is really working on. And so it was really good to know in terms of some of the impact that he shared. It was really helping women to increase, their income. And so this was such an amazing story also to hear. And then also advanced and unpaid work is some of the areas in which they work in. So this was quite very interesting to come out of the conversation. And also giving, especially women, because we consider them as the most vulnerable, like giving them that decision-making power, because with income also comes that. So it was good to hear some of these discussions. And also in terms of some of the constraints, one of the things that stood out, which I think was common amongst all the discussion, was in terms of access to capital finance, which is a big challenge, when it comes to small and medium enterprises. But one of the things that we could do, we discussed in terms of what could be done to improve, besides having access to finance, it would be good to also, one of the things that came up was on capitalizing on some of the lessons learned from the other businesses, and make it more visible, because this could help somehow cap the challenges that small businesses face. So share some lessons learned to support other businesses. This is a great way where we can overcome some of the challenges. And it was also nice to hear from some of the other businesses that are working in the Philippines, that are supporting with SME recovery. And then we had some businesses from Kigali as well as Colombia, and also facilitated some of the exchanges, especially with the Levine, I think I got the name right, which has a platform that supports digital access to finance. So already we've begun to have some exchanges on some agri-SME platforms that could be capitalized on. I'll stop here, and if Alejandro or anybody from the group wants to come in, feel free to chip in.
Alejandro, do you want to add to any of that summary?
You're muted, Alejandro.
You're muted.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't know. Yeah, no, it was a very quiet, very good summary. I would like just shortly to add that according to my process, and our experience, it would be great to make these agricultural problems more visible to entrepreneurial communities, but because I moved in that industry, right? All my experience what in the startup industry, and I can assure you that many of them are not aware at all of or what challenges and constraints, or even to turn it to opportunities in the agriculture system and all the potential. So I would add that definitely to more visible and how to become an impact entrepreneur. I think many new generations will love to hear that.
Impact entrepreneur. I like the words. That was great. Okay, well, let's move on to the third group. And actually, our rapporteur was having. She was joining us from Palestine, and it was very interesting for what she added. But we've lost her. She had some struggles with the internet. So let me just try and capture some highlights from the third group, working with Himents. Amazing platform for working with smallholders, both to kind of source product from them, but also in a way that helped them get better prices, and supported with some inputs and some advice and the like. So they're already working with in a year, like 300,000 smallholders. I think about 100,000 more closely than others, but still on a really significant scale, they're sourcing from smallholders, many who've got 1 and 1.5 hectare plots. So it really is tiny family farms. And they're seeing their data suggests there's a kind of strong evidence that they're both improving incomes to the point that people are being lifted out of poverty, and improving food security. So there's very compelling story there. A lot of that, when the kind of the limits that they hit are about the kind of wider like infrastructure in Nigeria, or dealing with post-harvest losses, access to working capital for farmers. So it's coming back to the cost of capital, which translates as a cost all the way through to how much money can get back to those farmers. So that was interesting. It was also, we had Javier, who's on the line as well from Smartfish. He had also some great stories coming through from Mexico, where they're elevating the incomes of their fisher folk by ensuring better prices for them, and also paying their own staff good wages and feeling like they're getting high quality staff for that. We then got into some good discussion. So some of the kind of almost talking about the limits of how far a company can go. So, for example, recognize it's so important that we elevate the incomes of women, but some of those women are actually on the family farm, so they're sort of the other side. And even when there was attempts to work to integrate women back into the supply chains by reaching them directly with perhaps some, I think it was some sort of subsidized inputs or the like, actually that value got captured by men in the family anyway. So it was very hard to kind of get beyond some of those things. So that was interesting. Another question was how we increase value by having the producers get more value. And that was a question coming from Immense, and there were some great examples from Javier about saying, actually, if you can help shorten the supply chain, you can start pushing some of the value back down to the farmers by giving them, or producers, in the case of fishers, by giving them opportunities to do some of the packaging or processing, turning the vegetables into salads. There was also good advice to say, actually, the farmers are not often very good at doing the final sales part. So it's not that they're not set up to do that well, but they can capture some more of the value and elevate the incomes. And then we also had a much kind of a wider conversation that came from Pete, sort of a little bit with Peter, about how do we start thinking about improving wages and labor rights and kind of legal rights and social protection. And, you know, we sort of talked about whether the informality of the sector makes, you know, your companies are often dragging the sector into something that has more formal structure. And that's a sort of sliding scale. It's not like a switch that goes on, but there's a sort of formalization. And as things become more formal, there is scope for stronger legislation. Although there's a sense that sometimes the use of the word informal is an excuse for governments and companies to not do that work. So I think there's a wider puzzle there, particularly for this group. Okay, so those were some of the things that came through. So yeah, it's actually time now to hear a bit more, Molly, from, you know, you've heard the experience of these small businesses. We've been inspired by their story, the work that they're doing, but also the limits they face about how far they can go on their own. Let's hear a bit from your big picture level, what this coalition's doing, and then we'll have a little bit of time to go, well, how do we connect the dots here between these different worlds?
Great, thanks Ian, and thanks everyone for sharing your ideas and stories. I think to start with, we're just going to share a video about the coalition because it gives a really good overview of the work we've been doing and what we intend to do. So just bear with me 1 second.
And just to say, afterwards, we're going to ask Luciana and Hemence to kick off with some reflections on behalf of SMEs about the work. So be listening, and then we'll open up everybody else to give some feedback. So enjoy. Here we go.
Over 4.5 billion people derive their livelihoods from agriculture, carrying the food that we eat through every level of our food systems. Yet often they themselves cannot access the very food that they help produce, and they face really poor working conditions and very limited protections. So we ask ourselves, how can this system be transformed? And how can we ensure that the voices of those who are marginalized are elevated and heard? We cannot address extreme poverty worldwide until we address economic justice and equitable livelihoods for every farmer, fisher folk, and food worker. This is the foundation for our coalition of action, decent work and living income and wages for all food system workers.
Agricultural workers regularly face poor working conditions, high levels of working poverty, and a lack of access to rights. In some countries, they are specifically excluded from key legal protections, such as minimum wages, paid sick leave, and the right to organise or to social protection. Guaranteeing safe and healthy working conditions, better incomes, and greater protection for agri-food workers is critical. It's critical if we are to build food systems that can withstand current and future crises.
The sunny morning and the last week on call the family they wake a doka king garden or and being an a fast on your garden and an a far and getting garden hotel. Family experience covering is 7 months so corner doku. Well, I need to go. Ngam fanga karamungo jo yele. No computer jo le certificate no computer jo diploma. Ngando koma fana school fees jo ngana ulula fana mako.
The coalition will generate more and better jobs in the food system, especially for youth. By accelerating commitment to decent wages and living income, it will help small-scale farmers reach their potential. It will also extend social protection programs, improve labor market governance, and strengthen social dialogue.
Governments, civil society, the private sector, and academics all have a role to play in bringing this coalition to life. The Dominican Republic has pledged its full support to the coalition so as to improve the livelihoods of our food system workers and their families. We invite you to join us and our partners in making this coalition a concrete reality across the world.
I hope you join us in this call to action to ensure people's rights are upheld and that they can provide for themselves and their loved ones with dignity.
Great. So we'll just put some slides up on the screen now, and I'll talk a little bit about the coalition. So as you saw from the video there, the coalition is anchored by 3 different agencies. So IFAD, ILO, and Care International. Thanks, Nana. Perfect. And so we're working together to make actions on the issues that we talked about. So around poor working conditions, high levels of working poverty, and the lack of access to rights that a lot of food systems workers often face. I think this became particularly evident during the pandemic, which really exacerbated kind of decent work deficits. And really the coalition kind of aims to rethink the traditional approach that we've had and hopefully move towards developing effective strategies to build back better. And I think as we've talked about, as became evident in the groups, that we're really wanting to focus on those that are most vulnerable. So looking at migrant workers, youth, women, Indigenous workers, informal economy workers, and also looking at those marginalised on different grounds, such as ethnicity, race, religion, and disability. So as Peter discussed at the top, the work we're doing is really founded on the concept of decent work by the ILO. So around rights at work, full employment, social protection, and social dialogue. And you can see the 5 priorities of the coalition here. So I'll just run through these and hopefully this will give you a bit of an idea on what we aim to do as a coalition. So the first one is around institutionalizing and strengthening labour and human rights and improving governance in food systems. So with this, we're looking to kind of integrate labour standards at national and local level to ensure there's no labour gap. And this is looking at issues around working conditions, freedom of association, prohibition of forced labour, and also child labour. The second one is around the promotion of decent employment with a focus on better jobs for the most vulnerable. And this really talks back to the points we were looking around constraints for SMEs. So looking at, what's stopping action? Is it knowledge? Do we need to facilitate more policy dialogues? Do we need to improve capacity? Or is it an issue around access to finance? The third one is around empowering food system workers through strengthening workplace organisation and social dialogue. Now, this is ensuring that the most vulnerable have agency through social dialogue, and whether that means establishing new mechanisms to achieve this or improving existing mechanisms. The fourth one is around ensuring the right to social protection and income security. So expansion of social protection as a human right, and also aiming to kind of accelerate nationally defined social protection floors that guarantee healthcare, access to food, and basic income security. And now the last one, which is a big kind of goal to move towards, is achieving 100% living incomes and wages. And we're working closely with WBCSD to make progress on that final priority there. And now you'll see from here, we've got kind of 4 different outcomes of which we're working towards, and this is across all of the priority areas. So the first arm is around research, so policy orientated research. So we're going to be creating tools and advocacy that can then help support progress on equitable livelihoods. The second is around policies and strategies to promote decent work. So particularly looking at international labour standards, and integrating those international food systems, and then also strengthening the capacity of national stakeholders to help implement those policies. The third, social dialogue platforms, so looking at mechanisms that we can establish or support that help facilitate consensus and also kind of foster mutual learning between different groups. And the final one around targeting interventions that can really have an impact on achieving equitable and sustainable livelihoods. If you could just flick to the next slide. And so I wanted to just show you this last slide. So the coalition itself is in the very early stages. We're just sort of working out how best we can operate, how we can bring different stakeholders together and what impact we can have. Priority area 5, which is led by WBCSD, is the most advanced of the priority areas we have. And so just to bring to life a bit of the work that they're doing within that priority area. So the first one is around establishing baselines on living incomes and wages and identifying those gaps. So then that information's there and people have something to work from. The second is looking at corporate performance and how those impact farmer income. So looking at how big companies can actually have an impact on improving farmers' wages. The third one, providing technical services and upskilling smallholders and agri SMEs and opportunities to do that. And lastly, increasing access to markets for smallholders and agri SMEs. So a very whistle-stop tour through the presentation, but we are having regular meetings with all of our stakeholders, of which we're really looking to expand and have as many diverse voices as possible. So we'd love to find a way to keep on engaging with you guys and find a way that we can be as supportive to you as possible in achieving decent work and living incomes and wages in your world of work. I think that's it from me.
Thanks, Molly. I mean, a massive ambition there. I'm curious, is there something where you're like, okay, we've got something we're doing now? I know it's taken a huge amount of work to set the agenda, but it feels like there's a little moment when you lean into going, actually, we're going to pick something off. Are you at that point, or is that still yet to come, where it turns into this is a thing that will have a felt impact?
Yeah, so I think we're still very much in the stages of working things out. And I think, we have the outcomes for the priority area 5, which we are starting to work concretely on. But I think for the other priority areas, it's very much we're still working out exactly what will be useful. And obviously there's another element to that, which is what member states are doing. So we're trying to work with member states to find out which countries really want to make progress on that and how we can support them. So, as you saw in the video there, we've been working with the Dominican Republic and we're in conversations with a number of other member states. And so the kind of the other angle to us setting the agenda on what we want to achieve on decent work is actually hearing what the issues are at member state level and where they want to make progress, and then how the ecosystem support we have within the coalition, how they can then support member states to achieve that.
Okay. All right, well, thank you. I'm going to actually open up for some people to do some kind of reactions to that and provide immediate responses from a SME perspective. I'm also scanning the chats. There's some interesting points coming in about perhaps a gap in there around everybody's talking about the importance of the digital tools. It's been a very powerful tool and we can come to that in a minute. But let me go through and not lead with what I think is interesting from listening. But let some SME voices come in. So I think I was going to look to Lustiana and to Hemence to kind of kick us off with some just quick reactions from you as people running small businesses. You know, what's your reaction? What do you think this group could do that would actually end up accelerating your ability to, you know, have an impact? What would your be feedback to say, hey, you know, you could take this and you could really work with small businesses to make an impact too? And Lustiana or Hemence, either of you can jump in. In fact,
just quick reaction. So first, I mean, I love the ending of that video about farmer dignity, and I think that's so important and crucial. Also, what they were talking about, a lot of smallholder farmers not being able to actually try their end product or even afford the product that they're producing. I mean, we see that with our cocoa farmers all the time, and so those are just strong reaction. Just cause strong reactions on my side. And then also your comment about the technology platforms and the opportunity there. You know, so I think there's really something there, and it's something that's needed across the board, across the region. And so being able to leverage each other's experience around that and how you design and build one that's farmer centric, I think it's an interesting opportunity.
Thanks, Hemence. It looks like Lustiana has dropped off. She was having some internet issues. So anybody, oh no, there you are. What am I thinking? No.
Okay.
Sorry. Go, Lustiana. I don't know why I didn't see it. Go for it.
All right, no problem. It's just a short information for me that, yeah, because I'm part of SME in food system, so I do hope that the coalition can influence policymakers to listen more to SMEs producing food. For example, the national governments to create and enforce clear, stable regulations, supporting SMEs producing food to grow and provide incentives, especially for smallholder farmers, and then people who are basically producing food for the entire community, and then big companies to buy from SMEs like us, and then the finance institutions to expand impact investment. And then by, strengthening the value chains increases profits and productivity for SMEs, which allows them to create more and better jobs and decent wage in their communities.
Thanks, Lustiana. Christine, you put in the comment here, can we add digital exclusion when the presentation was there? And I do that's really interesting I was struck by it because across the board, I'm seeing lots of you SMEs really, you know, especially those that are working with smallholders at scale, a lot of them are beginning to kind of adopt digital tools to work with smallholders. And it's a powerful and efficient way of aggregating smallholders in both directions. And I can see that we're going to have this digital divide that locks some people out of that transition. So really curious to hear, Christine, you know, what prompted that?
So we just, in some areas of the county, in the UK, we don't have broadband, we don't have mobile Wi-Fi connectivity. So all these great digital tools that are super cost effective that people can just start with, that can redesign how their business works very quickly and cost effectively, just don't have access to that. Or if they do have access, it's a time away from the farm. And so it's just not possible to even think about using it when it's a tool that's just there easily to be grabbed. And that's why, I mean, the digital divide or the digital exclusion seems to be great when we see fantastic case studies, but we really need to push that every part have access to digital tools to improve and be cost effective at a small scale, because I think small enterprises can adopt them really quickly. And we talk about multinationals being easier to do things, but actually very small businesses adapt super quickly and can change overnight, which you can't do when you've got policies and boards and things to agree over. So I think that is a competitive advantage, but it's really hard if you don't have access to that tool.
It's so funny. Christine, I didn't know until you started speaking that you're in the UK, and it's rather wonderful. I just assumed you were talking about the kind of digital exclusion in rural Nigeria or wherever, but you're not. You're talking about middle of rural England.
I am talking about UK, which people think would
that's
be
really interesting that it's
the exception. And this is why it's great to be on this platform, because all the words you're saying are exactly the same as what I'm seeing in the UK, but that's not what's projected, which is why I said earlier, we need to celebrate small farmers. We need to really push them and put them. And the farmer-centric element, nothing's designed with the farmer in mind here. It's a person making money.
Okay, well, that's interesting. I don't know whether Molly or anybody else from the coalition, is this an idea that's out there? Have people been thinking about that as part of this part of the work?
Thanks. No, I mean, these are exactly the reason why we want to have these conversations, I think, with you all, because we are definitely still in the sort of stage of working things out. So it's so helpful to actually hear more on what the issues are for, you know, people who are actually facing them on the ground. Yeah, well, I mean, we'll definitely take that forward as we start thinking through what will be included in the priority areas. But I mean, it's not something we've sort of thought through up to this point. So great to add to the list.
Thank you. Anybody else got anything they want to chip in and add as a kind of request or feedback to the coalition? I know we've got other good businesses here. Peter, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I would. I mean, when I listen to these type of conversations, we hear lots of new ideas and concepts, which is absolutely tremendous. We've got to move forward, but we've got to face the fact that in agriculture and food, many of the basic building blocks that we need to build on are simply missing or very shaky foundations. Sorry, am I still connected?
Yeah, you are. It was
And, you know, when we're having all this discussion about informality and decent work, it reflects that one of the facts we have to face is that many workers in agriculture and even farmers are simply excluded from basic labor protection and social systems. Now, if the Food Systems Summit is going to mean anything, this is where the governments, the companies, the civil society organizations, the trade unions have to come together and say that is a gap we have to fill. There's no reason why workers can't be brought under the same legislation, the same social systems of protection that protect industrial and commercial workers. And the second area where the Food Systems Summit could make with Molly organizing, could make a big difference. One of the reasons we struggle in agriculture is many countries simply do not have any systems for registering who works in agriculture. They have it for industrial and commercial workers, so they can tell you the number of workers who are working, you know, in the construction industry. They can often say it if they've got a car manufacturer. They don't have it for agriculture, so we have very bad data. So we don't often know how many farmers there are. We don't know how many wage workers, what percentage of women, what percentage of migrant workers. And until you fill these gaps, I'm sorry, you're not going to get through to decent wages and living income. You're daydreaming. I know that sounds a grim thing to say, but until you put some of the basics in place, it's not going to happen. A lot of the things we put in the Decent Work Coalition, they're problems we've known about for decades. You know, we're not coming along with radical new agendas. And the idea that we're suddenly going, you know, suddenly we have no proper exclusion of wage workers and farmers are excluded just as much as wage workers. And then we're suddenly going to move to 100% decent wages. Come on, let's get some reality on this on the table. Let's discuss some of the things you need to work out what needs doing at the government level. You need to work out the company policies and the like. It's great if the companies want to come in. It's tremendous, but we're going to have to sit down and discuss and negotiate. And the word I would use is negotiate. Okay. There's an element of negotiation as well as discussion.
A curious quick reaction from any SMEs on some of that. In particular, I think the idea that there's a need for social and legal protections that it creates kind of elevate a baseline of what's acceptable and is enforced. And as businesses that are trying to do your best, all of you are pushing forward. I wonder whether actually you've got competition that are managing to not internalize some of the costs you are by paying better wages and figuring out those incomes or treating people decently. How strong are your needs for some of that so that basically you're not undercut by less scrupulous competition? Have you got strong incentives to see those things come in? Or do you think actually that some of them might be a burden to you to have to kind of manage? Alejandro or Lastiana, Javier.
I'm sorry, I didn't really get the question. Were you talking about how more incentives in the business, whether it's actually?
Well, what I'm hearing Peter say is we need stronger legislation and enforcement of basic rights for workers. So,
it's not just, with respect to it, it's not just legislation, it's putting in basic systems. If you have a registration system for people who work in agriculture and food, you've got some means of tracking and setting targets. And at the minute that doesn't happen in agriculture. So we don't know the people on family farms. I mean, women who work on family farms deserve to get some form of remuneration. Why should they be cut out of the system? You can't get your handle on that. You can't control that if you don't know who they are. If you don't have numbers, I'm sorry, but it's look at agricultural systems around the world. They're often weak or missing. The registration systems. We get most of our data on farms, what's happening on farms, from what are called household surveys. This is when certain organizations will go and talk to the family farms and the like. You don't have regular reporting through the economic surveys. And that's what's missing. If you want data on wages, you're going to have a recording system for it. It's not going to work otherwise.
Any reaction from the entrepreneurs out there?
Yeah, well, they're just pick up his hand, so I will let him speak first. Sorry.
Yeah, Dare, go ahead. Or William? Is it William Dare or Dare William? Javier, jump in.
Okay, so I mean I agree with Peter about we need to bring people to I don't know, because he talked about formality and informality, but I think to be more formal, to be in the system, and that's a huge challenge, and that's a challenge that is for the governments, not for the companies. I don't think, I mean, that's one way or one space we have to work in. There's other spaces where companies have to work also. You need companies that work in a better way. Just to put, I'm sorry. Just to put an example of something that just what is happening?
Someone's not on mute.
Okay, so just to put an example, we started working with a co-op, a fisherman co-op, and we pay them like 100% more for the fish, and for them to be able to sell the fish to us, they have to make a legal step that is called an arribo. And this is something that they cannot do because they don't know how to do it. So they hire an accountant, and this accountant does it. But the accountant is paid by the other intermediary that buys fish from them. So this guy forbid the accountant to do this process, so they cannot legally sell the fish. So there's so many things that you have to work on if you want to improve the conditions, that because this one is they're almost slaves of this intermediary, because he managed everything. He managed salaries, he managed the accountant, he managed access to wherever they want to go. So I think there's a lot of things we need to work, and ones are government responsibilities, and others I think are our responsibility of doing things right.
Thanks, Xavier.
Maybe.
We've probably got time for one or two final comments before we start closing things up. So then with Dare or Lawrence, either of you want to chip in for a couple of minutes?
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Hello?
Go for it, Dare.
Hello? Hello?
Hello, go.
Hello? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm always very glad when a group of people sit down like this to talk about agriculture. And when we are having Africa at the back of our mind, it gladdens my heart. Because I believe that Africa was once the agri hub of the whole world. And when we are looking at talking about agriculture these days, and we don't focus our attention on agriculture, sorry, we don't focus our attention on Africa. I look at as if we have not started. And my contribution is, right now we discover that the African smallholder farmers actually need assistance. And if they are helped, they can boost the food system of the world. And I don't know how Africa can be helped in this regard. We run an NGO, and we actually focus on reviving the agricultural sector in Nigeria. And in extension, we also advocate to the other rest of Africa countries. So I don't know how organizations that look at Africa as a virgin land to exploit at this point in time. You could all agree with me, our colonial masters, what interested them most in Africa was agriculture. So I am looking at, once again, the 21st century, coming back again to Africa to invest in agriculture. So that will gladden my heart, and I don't know how we can be helped and assisted. Thank you very much. That's my contribution.
Thank you. Thank you, Dare. That's super. Okay, we really should be wrapping up, but Lawrence, one final just quick comment from you as you've got your hand up.
Yes, I wanted to contribute on the farmer, on decent wages. But I think the bottom line is not on addressing the wages and all the conditions and so forth, but it's all about forward integration and backward integration. And what do I mean? If you look at a piece of chocolate, if you analyze correctly where much of the revenue goes to, you would see that close to 65% goes to the distributor, and a certain percentage goes to the manufacturer, and the marketer, and so forth and so forth. A very little percentage goes to the farmer. So what am I saying is the business model has to be changed completely. The farmer has to be given the opportunity to value add, and also to have a distribution capability so that they can get in as much as revenue from what they are doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Lawrence. I think that's a really lovely way to close out, because I'm really struck by, when I hear the SMEs, a lot of your work is really about restructuring these supply chains in a way that allows producers and the most vulnerable people in the supply chains to capture more value. That is the good work that I see you doing. And then I think in a way, then that's interesting to sit as I listen to the coalition. A lot of your work seems to stand a little bit more about the kind of broader structural elements, the kind of foundations of how the whole food economy is run. But those two things, there's at some point they come together. So nice way to close out the discussion. I'm actually going to hand over to a few people just to make some closing remarks here. So first of all, Alejandro, you've been listening in. Where do you, having listened to all this, what are your hopes for the future here? And yeah, what are your hopes?
Thank you very much. No, I would close the conversation from my side giving you guys like 3 points. I totally agree what the last person told us, that we need to raise the bar and do things differently in order to achieve different outcomes. We need to raise the bar and go beyond those traditional cooperation, international cooperation models, and we need to definitely bring more practical opportunities and access to farmers. Definitely, that would be my first point. The second one is we need to look at what's going on around us about learning and developing models according about the market trends and use, because there are a lot of tools already built around e-commerce, logistics, to make the supply chain more efficient in order to set up value propositions to benefit more, to create more benefits to smallholder farmers. And I think the main challenge there is to adapt those models around technology, digital, and e-commerce to the rural development complexities and the culture. I think there's a huge challenge for us as entrepreneurs to adapt and to develop. And the third point is our responsibility as entrepreneurs to validate and to gather data and traction to attract more private capital. I think that from the coalition work, you're doing a great job, like sensing a lot of funds and probably potential investors. But it's our job to provide that that information and that traction in order to bring more private resources to solve these challenges.
Thank you. That's great. Really practical. 3 good suggestions there. Thank you so much, Alejandro. And let me then hand over to Nana, who's from the coalition, to share what you feel like the coalition's heard from the SMEs today and maybe some next steps for the platform.
Thank you very much, Ian. This has been a very great and remarkable discussion that we've had here. And the experiences and the results that have been shared through today's dialogue also kind of confirm that the SMEs also play an important role in advancing the decent work and the Living Econ Coalition, as we have seen through some of the examples and the experiences that shared by Indigo, Afex, and then Oja in India, as well as the other SMEs that shared their experiences during the breakout session. And we've seen that they're definitely an important engine for the job creation in these type of economies. So the key takeaways for us in terms of the fact that agriculture remains a critical role, plays a critical role, and it's important to keep focused on the farmer dignity and the farmer-centric outcomes from that angle. And then also the benefits of access to finance in SMEs are enormous and can definitely boost the impact of SMEs on decent work and living incomes. Another important point which Alejandro also spoke to is in terms of also a focus on the emerging technologies. And this, as we move forward with the coalition, will also form part of our thinking, and also on the point on influencing policy that provides support to small businesses. And we also keep on to think on finding ways to continue to connect with SMEs as we move forward in the coalition. So in terms of the next steps that we'll see from the coalition, Molly is going to share a presentation from today with the group, and then also to stay up to date on what is being planned in terms of what actions that we're planning to take moving forward with the coalition. And then also we invite those that are interested in our next stakeholder meeting to feel free to participate. Molly will also be sending out an invite in that regard. So on this note, I'll just end here and say that thank you to all those that have made this session very interesting and possible. And thanks, and over from my side, Ian, over to you.
Well, thank you. Well, I have an invitation for folks who can keep involved in the coalition that I hope some of you do. We need to keep closing the gap here, I think, between what happens at sort of 30,000 feet and the work of SMEs who are right down your feet on the ground, making change happen in really tangible ways. And it's that work that I'm really grateful for, and it's what drives me every day, is hearing your stories of the work you do, like in the messy reality of trying to make things better. So that's the thing that I'm most fundamentally grateful for. So yeah, thanks all for the time you all put in today, and we'll be posting this online within the week or so, and hopefully we'll find ways to keep collaborating. Thank you all.